text came at 9:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, right when I was settling into my third beer and a rerun of some cop show I'd seen a dozen times before. Working late tonight? Don't wait up. Love you. I stared at my phone screen, sitting in my cluttered apartment that somehow managed to feel both too small and too empty at the same time. Empty pizza boxes stacked on the coffee table, laundry basket overflowing in the corner, and my laptop still open from another day of fixing other people's computer problems at Nexus Tech Solutions. Sure thing, Eliza, I muttered to the empty room, taking another swig of beer. Get that bread, honey. My wife of 3 years had been working late a lot recently. Funny how her late nights always seemed to coincide with important projects at the company where we both worked. She was in HR, I was in IT, different departments, same building, same gossip mill that never stopped churning. I'd been Mark Halverson, systems analyst extraordinaire for the past 5 years at Nexus. Not the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills and kept me in beer money. Eliza had joined the company 2 years ago, right after we got married. Smart, ambitious, and according to everyone who met her, way out of my league. Maybe they were right. I was scrolling through my phone, half watching the TV, when Instagram decided to ruin my evening. Julie Martinez, Eliza's best friend and the company's unofficial social media coordinator, had posted a story from something called Girls' Night Out. The video was shaky, typical drunk girl at a bar footage, but clear enough. There was my loving wife, the one who was supposedly crunching numbers in some sterile conference room, making out with Greg Stanton in a VIP booth at Murphy's downtown. Greg Stanton? My boss. The guy who signed my paychecks and had been treating me like yesterday's garbage for the past 6 months. I watched the video 3 times before the shock wore off and the anger kicked in. Then I watched it 3 more times, taking screenshots and screen recordings like I was documenting evidence for a court case. Love in the time of hashtags, I said to my empty apartment. How romantic. The timestamp on Julie's story showed 8:45 p.m., 32 minutes before Eliza's text about working late. The math wasn't complicated, even for someone who'd had 3 beers. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screenshots on my phone. Part of me wanted to call her, scream at her, demand explanations, but a bigger part of me, the part that had been quietly noticing things for months, just felt cold and calculating. The way Greg had been looking at her during company meetings, the way she'd started dressing differently, buying expensive clothes we couldn't afford, the way she'd been distant, distracted, like she was already living in some other life that didn't include me. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to Ms. Patricia Evans, our head of HR. Subject, inappropriate workplace relationship, immediate attention required. Ms. Evans, I'm writing to inform you of a situation that requires your immediate attention. I have documented evidence of an inappropriate relationship between Greg Stanton, Director of Operations, and Eliza Halverson, HR Coordinator. This relationship represents a clear violation of company policy regarding supervisor-subordinate relationships and creates a hostile work environment for other employees. Attached, you will find photographic evidence of this relationship, including timestamps that contradict official work schedules. I trust you will handle this matter with the discretion and professionalism that such situations require. Regards, Mark Halverson, Senior Systems Analyst. I attached the screenshots and hit send at 10:43 p.m. Then I sat back, finished my beer, and waited for the first domino to fall. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Greg's name flashed on the screen, and I could practically feel the panic radiating through the device. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, then played the message on speaker. Mark, hey, it's Greg. Listen, we need to talk. There's been some kind of misunderstanding, and I think we can clear this up if we just sit down like reasonable adults. Call me back as soon as you get this. It's important. His voice had that tight, controlled quality of a man trying very hard not to sound desperate. I deleted the message without calling back. 20 minutes after that, Eliza came home. I heard her key in the lock, heard her heels clicking across the hardwood floor of our tiny entryway. She appeared in the living room doorway, looking perfectly put together except for slightly smudged lipstick and the faint smell of expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. Hey, baby, she said, dropping her purse on the chair and kicking off her heels. Sorry I'm so late. The quarterly reports were a nightmare. I bet they were, I said, not looking away from the TV. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. She paused, studying my face. Eliza was smart, always had been. She could read people like instruction manuals, which made her good at her job and dangerous as a wife. Everything okay? She asked, settling onto the couch next to me with that casual intimacy that married couples perfect over time. Just tired, I said. Long day fixing everyone else's problems. She curled up against my side, and I could smell Greg's cologne stronger now, mixed with wine and whatever perfume she'd started wearing lately. Something French and expensive that we definitely couldn't afford on our combined salaries. Poor baby, she murmured, running her fingers through my hair. Maybe this weekend we can do something fun, just the two of us. That sounds nice, I said, and meant it, because by this weekend everything would be different. She fell asleep against my shoulder an hour later, and I carefully extracted myself without waking her. In the kitchen, I poured myself another beer and checked my email. Ms. Evans had already responded. Mr. Halverson, thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. I will be conducting a thorough investigation starting tomorrow morning. Please keep this information confidential until the investigation is complete. We will schedule a meeting to discuss your concerns in detail. Regards, Patricia Evans, Director of Human Resources. I smiled for the first time all evening. The next morning, I got to the office early and set up camp at my desk with a clear view of both Greg's corner office and the HR department. Nexus Tech had one of those modern open-plan layouts with glass walls and exposed brick, designed to promote collaboration and transparency. The irony wasn't lost on me. Omar Patel, my closest friend at the company and the only other person in IT who shared my sense of humor, rolled in around 8:30 with his usual large coffee and confused expression. You're here early, he said, dropping into the desk next to mine. Did the servers crash again? Nope, just wanted to get a head start on the day. Omar was a good guy, probably the only real friend I had at Nexus. He was brilliant with computers, hopeless with people, and had a talent for making complicated technical problems seem simple. He also had a gift for being in the right place at the right time to overhear interesting conversations. Dude, he said, leaning closer and lowering his voice. Did you hear about the drama in HR? Ms. Evans called an emergency meeting first thing this morning. Greg's been in there for like an hour. I kept my expression neutral. Probably just budget stuff. You know how corporate gets this time of year. But Omar was right. Through the glass walls of the HR conference room, I could see Greg gesticulating wildly while Ms. Evans sat perfectly still, taking notes. Even from across the office, Greg looked like a man whose world was falling apart. Eliza arrived at 9, looking professional and composed in a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She went straight to her desk without looking in my direction, but I caught her glancing toward the HR conference room. At 9:45, Greg emerged from the meeting looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past hour. Ms. Evans walked him to the elevator, their conversation too quiet to overhear, but intense enough that half the office was pretending not to watch. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. Something weird is happening. Greg looks terrible. Any idea what's going on? I typed back, no clue, probably just work stuff. The beautiful thing about working in IT is that people expect you to know everything and nothing at the same time. I was the guy who fixed their computers and reset their passwords, invisible until something broke. It was the perfect position for watching the office ecosystem without being watched back. By lunchtime, the gossip mill was running at full capacity. Greg had been temporarily reassigned, pending an internal review. Eliza had been called into Ms. Evans' office twice. Julie from marketing was practically vibrating with nervous energy, deleting and reposting Instagram stories every few minutes. I ate my sandwich at my desk and watched the show unfold. The counterattack came faster than I expected. My phone rang at 2:30 p.m., right in the middle of a server maintenance window that required my full attention. Eliza's name flashed on the screen, and I almost ignored it, but something told me this call was important. Hey, I answered, keeping my voice casual. Mark, thank God. Her voice was tight, strained in a way I'd only heard a few times in our marriage. Can you talk? Privately? I looked around the office. Omar was deep in code, headphones on. The nearest coworkers were 20 feet away, absorbed in their own crises. Yeah, I can talk. What's wrong? Someone sent HR some photos, she said, and I could hear her walking, probably looking for a private place to have this conversation. Photos of me and Greg at Murphy's last night. Photos? I put just the right amount of confusion in my voice. What kind of photos? The kind that make it look like something was happening between us. A pause. Mark, I need you to know that nothing is going on. Julie was being stupid with her phone, taking videos of everyone, and somehow it got twisted into something it's not. The lie came so smoothly, so convincingly, that for a moment I almost believed her myself. Almost. Okay, I said. So what's the problem? If nothing happened, then HR will figure that out, right? It's not that simple. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They're treating this like a serious policy violation. Greg could lose his job, and if people think I was involved in something inappropriate... She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. Her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for could disappear if this got out of hand. What do you need me to do? I asked. Just, if anyone asks you about our marriage, about whether I've been acting differently, can you tell them everything's fine? That I've been working late because of the quarterly reports? Of course, I said. We're solid, right? No problems here. I could hear her relief through the phone. Right. No problems. I love you, Mark. I know this is weird and stressful, but we'll get through it. Love you too, I said, and hung up. Omar pulled off his headphones and looked at me. Everything cool? You look like someone just told you the servers are on fire. Just work drama, I said. You know how it is. But Omar was sharper than most people gave him credit for. He studied my face for a moment, then shrugged and went back to his code. The rest of the afternoon was a masterclass in watching people panic in slow motion. Greg had disappeared entirely, probably sent home while HR figured out their next move. Eliza spent most of her time in hushed conversations with Julie and a few other friends, no doubt coordinating their version of events. I stayed at my desk, fixing printer drivers and password resets, invisible and observant. At 5 o'clock, I packed up my stuff and headed for the elevator. Eliza intercepted me in the lobby, looking tired and stressed, but still beautiful in that way that had first attracted me to her. Want to grab dinner? She asked. I could use some normalcy after today. Sure. How about that place downtown? Murphy's? Her face went pale. Maybe somewhere else? I'm not really in the mood for crowds. Of course, I said. How about we just order pizza and stay in? Relief flooded her expression. That sounds perfect. We rode home in relative silence, the radio filling the space between us. Eliza stared out the window, lost in whatever calculations were running through her head. I drove and planned my next move. That evening, while Eliza was in the shower, I opened my laptop and did some research. Bank statements, credit card records, phone bills, all the boring financial archaeology that married couples usually ignore until tax season. What I found was interesting. Our joint savings account, the one we'd been building for a vacation to Europe, had been steadily drained over the past 3 months. Small withdrawals, nothing dramatic enough to trigger alerts, but consistent enough to add up to significant money. The credit card showed purchases I didn't remember. Expensive restaurants, boutique clothing stores, a jewelry purchase from last month that cost more than my monthly salary. I cross-referenced the dates with Eliza's work schedule. Every expensive purchase coincided with one of her late nights at the office. Honey? Eliza called from the bedroom. Can you bring me a glass of wine? Sure thing, I called back, closing the laptop. I poured her a glass of the expensive Pinot Noir she'd started buying recently, another purchase I didn't remember discussing. When I brought it to her, she was sitting on the bed in her robe, hair still damp from the shower, looking vulnerable and beautiful and completely untrustworthy. Thank you, she said, taking the wine and patting the bed beside her. Come sit with me. I sat, and she curled against my side like she had the night before, like she probably did with Greg in whatever hotel rooms or apartments they'd been using for their meetings. Mark, she said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Do you think I'm a good person? The question caught me off guard. I looked down at her, studying her face in the dim bedroom light. She looked genuinely troubled, like she was wrestling with something bigger than just getting caught in a lie. I think you're complicated, I said finally. But yeah, I think you're good. It wasn't entirely a lie. Eliza was capable of kindness, generosity, love. She was also capable of betrayal, manipulation, and casual cruelty when it served her purposes. Most people were complicated that way, I'd learned. The difference was that most people felt guilty about their darker impulses. I've made some mistakes, she said, but I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever you hear, you're the most important thing in my life. I know, I said, stroking her hair. We'll figure it out. She fell asleep in my arms an hour later, and I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathe and planning the next phase of my campaign. The next morning brought news that Greg had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The official company email was carefully worded corporate speak, but the office gossip was more direct. Someone had provided HR with enough evidence to take the situation seriously. Eliza read the email at her desk, her face carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in her shoulders from across the office. Julie hovered nearby, whispering urgently, probably trying to coordinate damage control. Around 10 a.m., Ms. Evans called me into her office. Patricia Evans was a woman in her 50s who'd built her career on being unflappable. She'd seen every kind of workplace drama, from embezzlement to harassment to the occasional fistfight in the break room. Nothing surprised her anymore, which made her both effective and slightly terrifying. "Mark," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk, "thank you for coming in. I wanted to follow up on the information you provided yesterday." "Of course," I said. "Whatever I can do to help." She opened a file folder and pulled out printed copies of the screenshots I'd sent. Seeing them in hard copy, official and documented, made the whole situation feel more real. "These are quite clear," she said, "but I need to ask you some difficult questions about your marriage." "I understand." "Has your wife mentioned any inappropriate relationship with Mr. Stanton?" "No. She's mentioned working closely with him on some projects, but nothing inappropriate." "Have you noticed any changes in her behavior recently? Unexplained absences, new expenses, anything that seemed unusual?" I paused, as if considering the question carefully. "She has been working late more often lately, and she did buy some new clothes recently, but she said it was for work. Professional wardrobe upgrade." Ms. Evans made notes. "The photos you provided show a level of intimacy that goes beyond professional collaboration. How did you obtain them?" "Instagram," I said. "Julie Martinez posted a story from their girls' night out. I happened to see it and recognized the policy implications." "You weren't upset to see your wife in a compromising position?" Another pause. "I was confused, but I figured there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was just the angle, or the lighting, or... I don't know. I thought HR should be aware in case it became an issue." She studied my face, looking for cracks in my composure. I kept my expression neutral, helpful, slightly concerned, but not devastated. "Mark, I have to ask this directly. Do you believe your wife is having an affair with Mr. Stanton?" I met her eyes. "I hope not. But if she is, I'd rather know the truth than live with suspicion." It was the perfect answer. Honest enough to be believable, vulnerable enough to be sympathetic, but not so emotional as to seem unstable. "Thank you for your candor," she said, closing the file. "We'll be conducting interviews with several employees over the next few days. I trust you'll keep these conversations confidential." "Absolutely." I left her office feeling like I'd passed the first major test. The investigation was officially underway, and I was positioned as the concerned but rational husband rather than the vengeful spouse. Now came the interesting part. The brunch was Eliza's idea, which made it perfect for my purposes. "I want to clear the air," she told me Friday evening, pacing around our living room like a caged animal. "All this gossip and speculation is getting out of hand. If I can just sit down with Julie and the girls, explain what really happened, maybe we can put this whole thing to rest." "That sounds smart," I said from the couch, where I was pretending to watch TV while actually watching her unravel. "Where were you thinking?" "The Greenhouse Cafe, Sunday brunch. Public enough to seem normal, but quiet enough for a real conversation." The Greenhouse was perfect. Trendy, crowded, full of young professionals with too much money and too little discretion. The kind of place where conversations carried and everyone was secretly listening to everyone else. "Want me to come along?" I asked. "Moral support." She paused in her pacing. "Would you? I know it's not really your scene, but..." "Of course. We're in this together, right?" Relief flooded her face. "Right. Together." I spent Saturday preparing. Omar had agreed to meet me for coffee that morning, ostensibly to discuss a work project, but actually to help me with some creative problem solving. "You want to do what now?" he asked, nearly spitting out his espresso. "Access the bank records," I said quietly. We were at a coffee shop across town, far from anyone who might know us from work. Just our joint accounts, nothing illegal. "Dude, that's not illegal. That's just sneaky as hell. Why don't you just ask her about the withdrawals?" "Because I want to see how she explains them when she doesn't know I already know." Omar studied my face. He was one of the few people who knew me well enough to recognize when I was operating on multiple levels. "This is about more than just the cheating, isn't it?" he said. "Yeah, I think it is." He sighed and pulled out his laptop. "Okay, but if this goes sideways, I was never here." 20 minutes later, I had printouts of every transaction from our joint accounts for the past 6 months. The pattern was even clearer in black and white. Systematic withdrawals that coincided exactly with her late nights and expensive purchases. "Holy crap," Omar muttered, looking at the timeline we'd constructed. "She's been planning this for months." "Planning what?" "I don't know, but this isn't impulsive cheating. This is strategic." He was right. The evidence suggested something much more calculated than a simple affair. Eliza had been methodically moving money, building a separate financial life, creating infrastructure for something bigger. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, perfect weather for uncomfortable conversations. The greenhouse was packed with the usual brunch crowd, couples recovering from Saturday night, families with screaming children, and groups of friends dissecting their social lives over overpriced eggs Benedict. Eliza had reserved a table for 6 in the center of the restaurant, maximum visibility for her public relations campaign. Julie arrived first, looking nervous and overdressed, followed by Sarah Chen from accounting and 2 other women I recognized from various office parties. I was the only man at the table, which made me both invisible and strategically positioned to observe everyone's reactions. So, Eliza began once everyone had ordered. I wanted to get us all together because there's been some confusion about what happened the other night at Murphy's. She launched into her prepared explanation. Julie had been taking videos all night. Everyone was having fun, and somehow an innocent moment between friends had been misinterpreted as something inappropriate. She was professional, convincing, and completely believable if you didn't know she was lying. The other women nodded sympathetically. Julie looked relieved to have her version of events validated. Sarah made supportive noises about workplace gossip and how unfair it was to judge people based on social media posts. I waited until there was a natural pause in the conversation, then pulled out the bank statements. "Eliza," I said quietly, "while we're clearing the air, maybe you could help me understand these." I spread the printouts on the table like a dealer revealing cards. Every withdrawal, every expensive purchase, every transaction that didn't match our household budget. The table went silent. Eliza's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, recognition, panic, and finally a kind of cold calculation. "Mark," she said carefully, "this isn't really the place for... For what? For asking my wife where our vacation money went?" I kept my voice level, conversational. "Because according to these records, you've withdrawn almost $8,000 from our savings account over the past 3 months, money we were saving for Europe." Julie leaned forward, studying the papers with the fascination of someone witnessing a car accident. Sarah looked uncomfortable, like she wanted to leave but couldn't figure out how. "I can explain," Eliza said, but her voice had lost its confident tone. "I'm sure you can, like how you bought Greg a Rolex last month." I pointed to a specific transaction. $1,500 at Brennan's Jewelry. Same day, you told me you were working late on the Henderson account. The silence stretched out until it became unbearable. Other diners were starting to notice our table, drawn by the tension that was practically radiating from our conversation. "You went through my personal transactions?" Eliza's voice was getting sharper, more defensive. "Our transactions. Joint account. Remember? The one we opened when we got married." Julie's phone was in her hand, and I could see her fingers moving. Probably texting someone, or posting something, or recording the whole conversation for later analysis. The social media generation never met a drama they couldn't document. "Look," Sarah said, clearly trying to diffuse the situation, Maybe we should what?" I asked, turning to her with a smile that probably looked more predatory than friendly. "Pretend this isn't happening? Pretend my wife hasn't been lying to me for months?" Eliza stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor loud enough to draw stares from nearby tables. "I don't have to sit here and be ambushed," she said, grabbing her purse. "Mark, we can discuss this at home like adults." "Sure," I said, not moving from my seat. "We can discuss it at home, along with Greg's cologne on your clothes and the hotel charges on the credit card." She froze halfway to standing, and I knew I'd hit something important. "Hotel charges?" I pulled out another printout, this one showing credit card transactions. 3 different hotels over the past 2 months, always on days when Eliza claimed to be working late. "The Marriott downtown," I read from the statement. "The Hampton Inn on 5th Street, the Courtyard by the airport. Funny thing about these charges. They're all for single nights, and they're all on days when you told me you were in the office until midnight." The table had gone completely quiet. Even the ambient restaurant noise seemed muted, like everyone in the place was holding their breath. Eliza sat back down slowly, her face pale but her eyes calculating. She was trying to figure out how much I knew and how much damage she could still control. "Mark," she said quietly, "you're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" "Because from where I'm sitting, I'm just asking reasonable questions about my marriage and my money." Julie's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it quickly. Her expression changed, and she looked up at Eliza with something that might have been pity. "Eliza," she said softly, "maybe you should see this." She turned her phone around, showing a text message thread that I couldn't quite read from my angle. But I could see Eliza's reaction, and it wasn't good. "What is it?" Sarah asked. Julie looked around the table, clearly torn between loyalty and the irresistible pull of gossip. "Greg's wife just filed for separation," she said finally. "It's all over Facebook. She's posting screenshots of text messages and other stuff." The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. While I'd been focusing on exposing Eliza's affair at work, Greg's wife had been conducting her own investigation at home. Now both sides of their secret relationship were collapsing simultaneously. Eliza closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked genuinely defeated. Then she opened them again, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Pure, cold rage directed at me. "You planned this," she said. "All of it. The HR complaint, the investigation, this whole public humiliation. You planned it. I documented it. I corrected. You and Greg planned it. I just made sure other people could see what you were doing." She stood again, this time with purpose rather than panic. "We're done," she said. "This marriage, this conversation, all of it. We're done." "Yeah," I agreed, gathering up the bank statements and credit card records. "I think we are." She walked out of the restaurant without looking back, leaving me at the table with 4 women who were staring at me like I'd just performed some kind of magic trick. "Damn," Julie said finally. "That was intense." "That was necessary," I replied, standing and dropping enough cash on the table to cover everyone's meals. "Thanks for the moral support, ladies. Enjoy your brunch." I left them there, probably already planning how they'd tell this story to everyone they knew. By Monday morning, the whole office would know exactly what kind of person Eliza Halverson really was. Phase 1 was complete. Greg made his move on Monday evening in the parking garage. I was working late, actually working this time, trying to finish a server migration that couldn't wait for normal business hours. The office was mostly empty by 7 p.m., just a few dedicated souls and the cleaning crew making their rounds. I was packing up my laptop when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Parking garage, level B2. Come alone." Subtle as a brick through a window, but I had to admire the directness. The garage was dimly lit and mostly empty, the kind of place where bad decisions got made in movies. I found Greg waiting by his silver Audi, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes had the desperate quality of a man watching his life fall apart in real time. "Mark," he said as I approached, trying to sound authoritative but missing the mark. "Thanks for coming." "Greg," I replied, stopping about 10 feet away. "Close enough to talk, far enough to run if things got interesting." "You look terrible." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, well, that tends to happen when someone destroys your career and your marriage in the same week." "I didn't destroy anything. I just took some pictures." "Cut the crap." His voice was getting louder, echoing off the concrete walls. "You orchestrated this whole thing. The HR complaint, the investigation, that circus at the restaurant yesterday. You've been planning this for weeks." "Months, actually. But who's counting?" The admission seemed to surprise him. He'd probably expected me to keep playing innocent, to maintain the pretense that this was all just an unfortunate misunderstanding. "Why?" he asked. "I mean, I get that you're upset about Eliza, but this is way beyond normal revenge. You've destroyed both of our careers, my marriage, everything we've worked for." "Your marriage was already over the minute you decided to screw my wife. Your career was over the minute you decided to abuse your position of authority. I just made sure other people found out about it." He took a step closer, and I could see the desperation in his eyes turning into something uglier. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. "Eliza and I, we were going to handle this properly. We were going to end things with you respectfully, help you transition to a new position, maybe even a better company. We were trying to be decent about it." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they confirmed what I'd suspected since seeing those bank records. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complete replacement plan. "Decent?" I laughed. "You call stealing my wife and plotting to get me fired decent?" "We weren't plotting anything. We were just making plans. For after." "After what? After you drove me out of the company? After you convinced everyone I was unstable, jealous, dangerous? After you made me disappear so you could start your new life without any messy complications?" His face told me I'd hit the target. Whatever plan he and Eliza had constructed, it involved getting rid of me entirely, probably with my reputation so damaged that I'd have trouble finding work anywhere else in the city. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said, and for a moment he almost sounded human. It just evolved. We tried to fight it, but what? You fell in love? Give me a break. You fell in lust with a woman young enough to be your daughter, and she saw an opportunity to upgrade her life. Don't dress it up as some grand romance. That got to him. His face flushed red, and he took another step forward. You don't know what you're talking about. Eliza is a user, I interrupted. She used me to get a job at your company. She used you to advance her career, and she was planning to use both of us to set up her next move. The only difference is that I figured it out first. Shut up. His voice was dangerous now, the careful executive mask slipping to reveal something raw and angry underneath. The truth hurts, doesn't it? You thought you were the sophisticated older man sweeping the young woman off her feet, but really you were just another mark, another stepping stone in her career plan. I said, shut up. He lunged at me then, 40-something executive desperation meeting 30-something IT guy reflexes. I sidestepped, and he stumbled past me into the side of his precious Audi. Careful, Greg. That car's probably worth more than my annual salary. He spun around, face twisted with rage, and swung at me. I ducked, and his fist connected with the concrete pillar behind me. The sound of knuckles meeting stone echoed through the garage, followed immediately by his scream of pain. You crazy piece of... I'm crazy? You're the one who threw a punch in a parking garage like some teenager. I pulled out my phone and started recording video. For the record, Greg Stanton, Director of Operations at Nexus Tech Solutions, just physically assaulted me in the company parking garage. I defended myself, and he injured himself attacking a concrete pillar. Turn that off, he snarled, lunging for my phone with his good hand. I stepped back again, keeping the camera rolling. Nekalt, as I'm also documenting his continued aggressive behavior and his admission that he and my wife were planning to have me fired from my position. I never said that. You said you were making plans for after. After what, Greg? After I mysteriously became unemployable? He stopped trying to grab my phone and just stood there, breathing hard, holding his injured hand. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the parking garage, he looked older than his 40-something years, like a man who'd made a series of catastrophically bad decisions and was just now understanding the consequences. This isn't over, he said finally. Yeah, it is. Your wife has already filed for separation. HR is conducting a formal investigation that's going to end with your termination. And now I have video evidence of you assaulting me in the workplace. I stopped recording and put my phone away. But hey, look on the bright side. At least you and Eliza can be unemployed together. I walked away, leaving him standing there next to his expensive car, cradling his broken hand and probably contemplating the ruins of his carefully constructed life. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find that news of Greg's parking garage meltdown had already spread through the building. Apparently, someone from the cleaning crew had witnessed the encounter and shared the story with anyone who would listen. Omar was waiting at my desk with coffee and a concerned expression. Dude, he said, handing me a cup. Please tell me you didn't actually fight Greg Stanton in the parking garage. I didn't fight him. He fought a concrete pillar. The pillar won. This is getting serious, man. Like potentially dangerous serious. Maybe you should back off. Let HR handle the rest of it. I appreciated his concern, but Omar didn't understand the full scope of what Eliza and Greg had been planning. The bank records were just the beginning. Over the weekend, I'd done more digging into our financial records, and what I'd found was disturbing. Look at this, I said, pulling up a document on my computer. Remember that loan application we submitted last year for the house down payment? Yeah, you got turned down because of credit issues or something. Right, except I never had credit issues. But somehow my credit report showed a bunch of late payments and defaulted accounts that I'd never opened. Omar leaned closer, studying the screen. Identity theft? Or identity sabotage. Someone with access to HR records and personal information could easily mess with credit reports, employment verification, all the stuff that determines whether you can get a loan or a job. You think Eliza... I think Eliza and Greg were planning to systematically destroy my financial credibility while building a case for my termination, make me unemployable and unbankable, then offer to help me find work in another city, far away from their new life. Omar sat back in his chair, looking stunned. That's sociopathic. That's strategic. And it almost worked. What are you going to do? I smiled, and Omar visibly flinched. I'm going to return the favor. The warehouse had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since Hartley Manufacturing moved their operations to Mexico. It sat on the edge of the industrial district, a massive concrete shell surrounded by weeds and broken glass, the kind of place urban explorers loved and city planners pretended didn't exist. Everyone at Nexus called it the pit because of the loading dock that dropped 15 feet below street level, creating a natural amphitheater effect. It was where people went to smoke weed, spray graffiti, and have conversations they didn't want overheard. It was perfect for what I had in mind. The plan had taken 2 weeks to orchestrate, with Omar's reluctant help and Julie's enthusiastic cooperation. Julie had turned out to be surprisingly useful once she realized that Eliza had been lying to her for months. Hell hath no fury like a best friend scorned, apparently. The setup was elegant in its simplicity. I'd sent Greg a text from an untraceable phone, claiming to be from Eliza and asking him to meet her at the pit for a private conversation about their future. At the same time, Julie had convinced Eliza that Greg wanted to meet her there to discuss their next move. Meanwhile, Omar had set up a discreet live stream using some creative camera placement and a few pieces of borrowed equipment from the office. Nothing illegal, just good positioning and public access internet. I arrived first, positioning myself in the shadows of the loading dock with a clear view of both entrances. The late October evening was cold and damp, with the kind of gray sky that made everything look like a noir film. Eliza showed up exactly on time, picking her way carefully across the broken pavement in heels that were completely inappropriate for urban exploration. She looked nervous, but determined, like someone preparing for a difficult but necessary conversation. Greg arrived 5 minutes later, moving with the cautious aggression of a man who'd been making bad decisions for months, and was committed to making a few more. His hand was still bandaged from his encounter with the concrete pillar, but he carried himself like he was ready for another fight. They saw each other across the empty space of the warehouse floor, and I could see the confusion on both their faces. This wasn't what either of them had expected. "Did you send me that text?" Eliza called out, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I thought you sent one to me," Greg replied, walking toward her but keeping his distance. The moment of realization was beautiful to watch. They turned simultaneously, scanning the shadows and broken windows, looking for whoever had orchestrated their meeting. "Hello, Eliza. Greg?" I stepped out of the shadows, and both of them spun toward my voice. "Thanks for coming. We need to talk." "Mark." Eliza's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the fear underneath. "What is this about?" "This is about the truth," I said, walking closer but staying out of arm's reach. "About what you two have really been planning." Greg moved protectively toward Eliza, which would have been touching if it wasn't so pathetic. "We don't owe you any explanations," he said. "This is between consenting adults." "You're right. The affair is between consenting adults. But the systematic destruction of my career and financial credibility, that involves me." I pulled out a folder full of documents: bank records, credit reports, employment verification requests, loan applications. The paper trail of their plan to erase me from their lives. "Identity sabotage is a felony, Greg. Using your position as a director to manipulate HR records, employment references, credit information, that's not just an affair. That's fraud." Eliza's face went pale. "Mark, I don't know what you think you've found, but I found everything." I opened the folder and started reading. Falsified employment verification that cost me the job at Morrison Tech, credit report manipulation that ruined our home loan application, background check interference that blocked me from 3 different companies. I looked up at them, 2 people who'd thought they were smart enough to destroy someone's life without consequences. You weren't just having an affair. You were systematically eliminating me from my own life. "That's not—" Greg started, but I cut him off. "That's not what? Not illegal, not cruel, not the kind of thing that ruins people's lives?" I pulled out my phone and started playing an audio recording. Omar's technical skills had come in handy for more than just live streaming. Greg's voice filled the warehouse. "We need to make sure Mark can't cause problems later. If he's unemployable in this city, he'll have to move somewhere else. Start over." Eliza's voice followed. "The credit stuff was genius. He'll never be able to prove we did it, and by the time he figures it out, we'll be untouchable." The recording continued for 3 more minutes, laying out their entire plan in damning detail. How they'd use Greg's connections to blackball me from the local job market. How Eliza would use her HR access to sabotage my references. How they'd systematically destroy my financial credibility while building their new life together. When the recording ended, the warehouse was silent except for the sound of wind through broken windows. "Where did you get that?" Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. "Your apartment has thin walls," I said, "and Omar is very good with audio equipment." Greg was staring at me like I'd just revealed I could fly. "You've been recording us? For how long?" "Long enough. Long enough to document your fraud, your conspiracy, your abuse of authority. Long enough to build a case that will destroy both of your careers and probably land you in federal prison. You can't prove any of this, Greg said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can. Omar and I spent the last 2 weeks building a timeline that connects every suspicious credit report change, every blocked job application, every mysterious reference problem to times when you two were together. The pattern is unmistakable. I pulled out another document, this one official looking with government letterhead. I've already filed complaints with the Federal Trade Commission, the State Attorney General's Office, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Identity theft and conspiracy to commit fraud are federal offenses, Greg. You're looking at 5 to 10 years. Eliza made a sound like a wounded animal. Mark, please. We can work this out. We can fix this. Fix this? You tried to destroy my entire life, my career, my credit, my future. You were going to make me disappear so you could play house without any inconvenient complications. It wasn't supposed to hurt you, she said, and I could see tears starting to form. We just wanted to be together. You wanted me gone. There's a difference. Greg stepped forward, his injured hand clenched into a fist. You self-righteous piece of garbage. You think you're so much better than us? I think I'm honest, which apparently makes me better than you. He lunged at me again, and this time I was ready. I sidestepped and grabbed his arm, using his momentum to spin him around and pin him against the concrete wall of the loading dock. Let me go, he snarled, struggling against my grip. In a minute. First, I want you to understand something. This recording, these documents, all the evidence I've collected, it's already been distributed. Omar has copies. My lawyer has copies. The FBI has copies. Even if something happens to me, this doesn't go away. I released him and stepped back. But here's the thing. I'm not a vindictive person. I don't actually want to see you two in prison. Hope flickered in Eliza's eyes. What do you want? I want you gone. Both of you. Out of my company, out of my city, out of my life. Resign from Nexus, move somewhere else, start over with clean slates. And if we do that? Greg asked, rubbing his arm where I'd grabbed him. Then maybe the federal complaints get withdrawn. Maybe the evidence gets sealed. Maybe you get to rebuild your lives instead of spending the next decade in orange jumpsuits. It was a generous offer, more generous than they deserved, but I wasn't interested in revenge for its own sake. I just wanted them gone. Eliza looked at Greg, some silent communication passing between them. Then she looked back at me. How do we know you'll keep your word? You don't, but you know what happens if you don't take the deal. The silence stretched out until it became uncomfortable. In the distance, I could hear traffic on the highway, the normal sounds of a city going about its business while 3 people's lives hung in the balance. Finally, Greg nodded. Fine, we'll resign. We'll leave. Good choice. I started walking toward the exit, then paused and turned back. Oh, and one more thing. Julie's been live streaming this entire conversation. So if you're thinking about changing your minds or trying some kind of retaliation, remember that half the city just watched you confess to federal crimes. The look of absolute horror on their faces was worth every moment of the past month's planning. Consider this your final paycheck, I said, and walked out of the pit into the cool night air. Behind me, I could hear Eliza crying and Greg cursing, but I didn't look back. Some chapters needed to end decisively, without epilogues or second chances. By the time I got home, Omar had already sent me the live stream statistics. Over 3,000 viewers, hundreds of comments, and enough recorded evidence to ensure that Greg Stanton and Eliza Halverson would never work in this city again. I poured myself a beer, sat down in my cluttered apartment that suddenly felt much less empty, and started planning my next chapter. It was going to be a good one.